They didn't break the law, they broke something deeper, something you can't fix with a rule book. What makes a community turn against someone who once fought for them? Let us know in the comments section below, and be sure to subscribe, as this story unfolds with loyalty, injustice, and a twist you won't see coming. Rebecca Callahan, Army, 2 tours, 4th Infantry Division. That's how she introduced herself to anyone who asked, though no one in the Whispering Pines subdivision ever did. They never asked about the patch on her backpack, or the burn scar running from her elbow to her wrist. No one said thank you for her service. Not at the HOA meetings, not on her daily walks past the manicured flower beds, not when she pulled weeds from the front yard of her modest home on Redwood Court. Her neighbors called her the Jeep Lady, not out loud, of course, but they whispered it behind closed blinds and tight little grins at block parties. She knew. Becky noticed everything. 21 years old when her Humvee rolled over an IED outside Kandahar. 22 when she pulled 3 squad mates out of burning wreckage. 23 when she returned home with a rebuilt shoulder in a Jeep that hadn't run in 10 years. She rebuilt that Jeep bolt by bolt. Midnight oil and early morning prayers. It was a 92 Wrangler. Desert tan, lifted frame, battle-worn and beautiful. Her father left it to her the year he died. A Vietnam vet who taught her how to handle a torque wrench before he taught her how to drive. The Jeep didn't fit the aesthetic of Whispering Pines. Gordon Trask made sure she knew that the very first time they met. "I'm afraid vehicles like that need to be parked inside the garage, Ms. Callahan," he'd said, adjusting his HOA badge like it was a sheriff's star. Becky had just come back from the VA hospital wearing a sling and a smile. She looked him in the eye. "It doesn't fit, not even with the roof off, and my garage is full of tools. I'm a mechanic." Trask blinked like she'd spoken Swahili. "That's unfortunate, but the board has standards. There's a certain look we maintain here." She wanted to laugh. Standards? She'd upheld higher standards sleeping in mud pits in Helmand Province than anything Gordon Trask could imagine. But she didn't argue that day. She rolled the Jeep forward a few feet just to shut him up. Every morning after that, she parked it neatly in her driveway, wheels straight, tires chalked, hood gleaming in the Texas sun. She even put one of those little garden gnomes next to it, just for spite. And every month, a new notice arrived in her mailbox. Violation of Section 8, Article B, visible vehicles in excess of height limitation, followed by fines, then threats, then a warning. It became a game, until the game stopped being funny. It was a Wednesday. Mid-morning, quiet. Birds chirping like nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. Becky was under the Jeep, wrench in hand, tightening the skid plate she'd custom-welded just last weekend. Her service dog, Brutus, a brindled pit lab mix, dozed beside her in the shade. Then she heard it. The beep-beep-beep-beep of a tow truck backing up. She rolled out from under the Jeep and blinked against the light. 2 men in reflective vests were angling the truck toward her driveway. Trask stood near the mailbox with his arms folded and a smug little half-smile twitching at his lips. "You can't be serious." Trask didn't even flinch. "You were warned, Ms. Callahan, repeatedly. The board voted." Becky's boots hit the concrete like gunshots. "You voted to destroy private property? It's being towed to a compliance yard. If you want it back, you'll need to pay the accumulated fines and storage costs. Otherwise, you'll scrap it," she finished. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The tow chain clinked against the Jeep's undercarriage. Becky stepped forward. Brutus growled. The driver paused. Trask raised a hand. "Let them do their job, or I'll have to call the police." Becky looked him dead in the eye. "Do it." He hesitated just long enough. She turned toward the tow truck driver, pulled her ID out of her back pocket, and held it up. "U.S. Army, that Jeep is legally registered, fully operational, and insured. I have receipts for every part on it. You touch it, and I'll file a lawsuit so fast you won't remember which end of that rig you drive from." The driver shifted uncomfortably, his partner nudging him. "Ma'am, the partner said. "We were told it was an abandoned vehicle." Becky gave a sharp laugh. "Well, Jeep is my soul. It's the only damn thing that brought me back from war in one piece." Trask stepped forward. "Enough. You're creating a hostile environment." Becky turned toward him. "You made it hostile." She didn't raise her voice, didn't scream, but something about her stillness, about the way her hands hung by her side like they'd once held something heavier than a wrench, made the men pause. Trask faltered. Then, in a petty display of authority, he snapped, "Do it!" And the driver reluctantly obeyed. The Jeep was dragged away like a carcass. Becky didn't move, not when Brutus whined, not when Trask strutted off like he'd won something. She stood in her driveway long after the sound of the tow truck faded. The empty space in front of her house gaped like an open wound. Brutus nudged her hand. She blinked. Then she went inside and made a phone call. Becky Callahan never believed in asking for help. Not when her convoy got ambushed in Wardak. Not when she came home to a half-empty apartment and a medical discharge stapled to her chest. Not when the VA counselor gently asked if she ever felt unwelcome in civilian life. She had a simple answer for that. "I don't need welcome. I need peace." But peace was a joke in Whispering Pines. The day her Jeep was taken, Becky didn't cry. She didn't punch a wall. She didn't even curse. She just stood in the doorway of her kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee untouched on the table, and stared at the old photo of her and her dad beside the Wrangler. He was leaning against the hood, sleeves rolled up, cigarette dangling from his lips like a character out of some old movie. She was 17, all elbows and ambition, wearing oil-stained jeans and his oversized work shirt. That was the summer he taught her how to drop a transmission and hold her breath during grief. He'd told her one thing over and over again. Don't let anyone tell you where you belong, unless they've earned the right to bleed next to you. The HOA hadn't earned that right. By early afternoon, Aaron Lopez showed up. Short, fierce, a whirlwind of energy in yoga pants and combat boots, she barged through the front door without knocking. "I saw it," she said. "No hello, no how are you, just straight to war." Becky didn't turn from the window. "They said I violated the aesthetic standards of the community." "Aesthetic standards?" Aaron snorted. "This from the man who thinks stone flamingos are classy. You know, Gordon Trask still uses dial-up." Becky didn't laugh. Aaron stopped in her tracks, taking the stillness in like a punch. "Hey," she said softly, "what do you need?" "Just wanted coffee," Becky muttered. Aaron put a hand on her shoulder. "They took your Jeep, not your spine. We're gonna fix this." But Becky shook her head. "Fix what?" "They've got the rules, the bylaws, the board. Hell, they've got a file on me so thick it probably has a table of contents." Aaron didn't answer right away. She moved to the fridge, grabbed 2 beers, popped the tops with her ring, and handed one over. "You remember what you told me when Tyler's kid called me a terrorist at the 4th of July parade?" Becky blinked. "I told you he was lucky his mom was there to save him." "No," Aaron said, smiling faintly. "You told me. They want to rewrite what this country is, but they forget who wrote the damn first draft. You told me not to sit down when someone tried to erase my story. Now, I'm telling you, don't let them erase yours." That night, Becky couldn't sleep. Not because of what happened, but because of what she knew was coming. Trask had power, and men like him never used it quietly. They wielded it like a dull blade, slow, clumsy, but just sharp enough to hurt. She scrolled through her phone in the dark. The screen glowed against the shadows of her bedroom. Her thumb hovered over one name, Roy Merriman. Sergeant Roy Merriman, Rail Ops Coordinator for the Army's 3rd Expeditionary Sustainment Command. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since she left Fort Hood, but he was family, not by blood, but by sand and smoke and silence. She tapped call. It rang once, then again. Vex. His voice was a thunderstorm held back by decades of discipline. "I need a favor," she said. There was no hesitation. "Where, and how big?" She smiled into the dark. By morning, Whispering Pines hummed like any suburban hive. Sprinklers sputtered to life, joggers lapped the cul-de-sacs, Trask watered his rose bushes, whistling some Sinatra tune like he was auditioning for a life he never earned. Becky sat on her porch with Brutus at her feet, sipping hot black coffee. Her driveway was still empty, but not for long. Around 8:47 a.m., the first complaint hit the neighborhood group chat. "Car and Mum. Anyone else hearing a weird rumble from the west side? Dog pit. Sounds like heavy trucks. Road construction." Miranda said. "Woke my baby up. I swear if it's the city again." Becky read each message with a calm smile, because she knew what they didn't. 10 miles outside town, a massive military transport train was grinding across the countryside, en route to Fort Tilling. 17 cars long, 3 diesel engines. It carried Humvees, tanks, logistical cargo, and, behind it all, like a sentinel on rails, the Patriot Memorial Car, a symbolic rolling monument rarely seen outside of ceremonial duty. Roy rode the lead engine, sunglasses low on his nose, radio crackling in his left hand. "Approaching Whispering Pines Municipal Junction," he said into the comms. "Per request. Slowing to a full stop across all 4 crossings." "Roger that," came the voice on the other end. "Reason for hold?" Roy grinned. "Veteran relations." Within the hour, panic set in. Trask's morning meeting with the HOA board was canceled when none of them could leave their driveways. Miranda couldn't drop her kid off at preschool. Doug couldn't get to his real estate showing. Karen's brunch date was iced. What? Every exit out of Whispering Pines had a steel locomotive resting across it like a barrier in a war zone. And no one knew why. No one except Becky. At 10:14 a.m., she got a text from Roy. "Motion. Decision to movement. Hold position. Time to make your move." Becky looked out over the neighborhood where people gathered in confused clusters at intersections. Phones were out. Arguments flared, the usual order. The HOA's order was unraveling. Aaron showed up, panting from a jog. "They're freaking out." Becky nodded. "Press coming." "Already here," Aaron said, pointing to the news van idling near the main road. Becky stood. Time to remind them what real inconvenience looks like. She took a deep breath, then walked into the street. Becky stood in the middle of Redwood Court like it was a battlefield. Not the kind with mortars and machine guns, but the kind fought with stares, silence, and the weight of what people don't say. Residents slowly trickled from their houses, shielding their eyes against the morning glare and the looming bulk of the military train that stretched across all 4 of Whispering Pines' exits like an iron gate dropped by history itself. The tension was palpable. Some looked furious, others looked curious, and more than a few looked nervous, as if something fundamental had shifted in the neighborhood's perfectly balanced ecosystem of tidiness and polite avoidance. Trask arrived last. His golf cart screeched to a halt near the community fountain, its little American flags fluttering like confused bystanders. He wore a pastel yellow polo, khaki shorts, and the expression of a man used to getting what he wanted, only to realize someone else brought a bigger hammer. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Becky didn't answer him. She wasn't facing Trask. She was facing the people. Aaron stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed. Camera crews were starting to position themselves near the perimeter of the cul-de-sac, news anchors straightening their hair, getting ready to spin the chaos into a digestible headline. Becky cleared her throat, her voice low but unwavering. "I didn't want this," she said. "None of this. I wanted a home, a driveway to park in, a place where I didn't have to explain why a 20-year-old Jeep meant more to me than any of these flower beds." Someone in the crowd, older, gray-haired, wearing a navy ball cap, nodded slowly. "But they took it," she went on, "because of a bylaw, because it was unsightly, because it didn't match the neighborhood." She paused, scanning the faces. "Neither do I, apparently." Trask stepped forward. You've made your point, Callahan. You're creating a disruption. This is federal equipment, and I guarantee you'll be charged with obstruction. Obstruction? Becky turned now. Her voice had steel in it. You think I stopped that train? He blinked. Becky reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With one tap, she put it on speaker and held it up. Roy, she said. Yo, Sarge, came the voice on the other end, crackling with engine noise in the background. Still holding? Everything good on your end? Just making introductions. Trask's jaw tightened. Is that a military official? Roy Merriman, retired. Now contracts logistics with the Department of Defense. You know what that means, right? Trask swallowed. This is outrageous. You want to talk about outrageous? Becky said, stepping closer now, her boots crunching the gravel like punctuation. You destroyed a combat veteran's property over a technicality. You made it personal. I made it memorable. Behind her, the crowd was shifting. Whispers were turning into murmurs. A few were starting to ask questions aloud. Wait, what do you mean destroyed? They towed her Jeep, Aaron said loudly, without giving her a final warning. Took it to some scrap contractor on the edge of town. Told them it was an abandoned eyesore. A woman gasped. That old tan one? My husband said it looked like something out of a war zone. It was, Becky replied flatly. Miss Callahan, Trask said, struggling to reassert control, this is not the venue. It's exactly the venue, she cut in. This neighborhood, these people, this country. We keep saying we support our veterans, but only when they're silent, smiling, and staying out of the way. The second we're inconvenient, we're disposable. That's not fair. Tell that to my Jeep, she snapped. Silence. Thick and total. The news cameras had begun to roll. Becky turned back to the crowd. My father gave me that Jeep before he died. A Marine, Vietnam. He never made peace with how people treated him when he came home. Said the only way he ever felt respected again was when he got under the hood and made something run like new. She let that hang in the air. I didn't just restore a vehicle. I restored my damn dignity. And they crushed it because the neighborhood aesthetic didn't like a piece of my past in plain view. Someone in the crowd clapped once, then twice. Another joined in. Then a ripple of applause moved like a breeze through the street. Trask turned red. This is a public safety issue. We need access. Becky smiled coldly. There's access. Pedestrian paths are open. Emergency vehicles were given notice. And the Department of Defense signed off on a temporary hold due to civilian recognition protocol. Aaron handed her a paper from a manila folder. Signed order, she said, smirking at Trask. Want to call the Pentagon and complain? A pickup truck pulled into the edge of the crowd. Out stepped a man in dusty coveralls and grease-stained boots. Kevin Vance, the local mechanic. He held up his phone. I just got a call, he announced. Military recovery transport is heading to the yard where the Jeep's sitting. They're picking it up and bringing it back per Dodd request. More gasps. Kevin walked over to Becky and offered a hand. You want me to have my boys ready to unload it when it comes in? Becky nodded. Thanks, Kev. Another beat. Then the Navy veteran stepped forward. My name's Bill. I was on the Kitty Hawk back in '66. Miss Callahan, if you ever need anything, landscaping, paint, groceries, you let us know. Becky looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. Sometimes it takes a wake-up call to see what kind of neighbors we've become. Another woman stepped forward, then a man, then another, offering help, a place to store the Jeep, a new battery, donations to cover the fines. It was small, awkward, but real. Trask saw his power dissolving like sugar in rain. You're making a spectacle, he muttered. Becky looked him in the eye. No. You made a mistake. The sound of approaching engines interrupted them. Military vehicles arriving to handle the recovery. The transport flatbed turned the corner, flanked by two army escorts, flags on the bumpers flapping with dignity. As they pulled up, people moved aside, parting like the Red Sea around something greater than all of them. And for once, they watched. They didn't look away. The transport truck stopped with a groan of compressed air. The metal ramp unfolded like a drawbridge returning a queen's chariot. It was there, rumbling atop the flatbed, covered in a light tarp that did nothing to hide the silhouette beneath it, boxy, stubborn, and beloved. The Jeep had come home. Becky stepped forward, her boots striking pavement that now felt different. Less like enemy territory, more like reclaimed ground. She reached up and grasped the side of the tarp. She didn't rip it away like in a movie. She peeled it back, slow, reverent, until the tan metal shone in the sun, chipped but proud, with a faded Callahan stenciled above the windshield in black letters. The crowd quieted. Even the birds stopped. A scuffed American flag decal remained on the hood, somehow untouched, like it had refused to be crushed. Becky pressed her palm to the metal. It was warm. Aaron let out a breath behind her. Damn thing looks like it just walked out of a sandstorm. It survived worse, Becky whispered. Roy's voice crackled on her phone again. Told you I'd get it back. You okay, Bex? She nodded and lifted the phone. Better now. Trask hovered at the back of the gathering, his phone still in hand, clearly struggling with whether to call someone above his pay grade or crawl back into his perfectly trimmed lawn and pretend none of this happened. But this wasn't a story he could rewrite with memos and fines. Becky turned to him. You broke a veteran's trust. That won't be forgotten. He looked like he might argue again, like pride was swelling up for one last gasp. But then he saw the news camera shift toward him, the reporter silently urging a reaction. He lowered his eyes instead and gave a tight nod. A quiet murmur passed through the crowd as Becky hopped up onto the flatbed. Brutus barked once, tail wagging, and waited as she climbed into the driver's seat. The leather cracked a little as she sat. Her hands slid onto the wheel like they never left. She turned the key. The Jeep coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The engine didn't purr. It growled, a deep, throaty sound of resistance and survival. It echoed off the houses, bounced down the street, filled the silence like a war song that refused to die. And that was when the clapping began again. Not polite applause this time, not neighborhood approval. This was the sound of a crowd realizing they'd failed someone, and choosing not to fail her again. Bill raised his hand in salute. Others followed. Becky sat there, behind the wheel, tears sliding quietly down her cheek, not from sadness, but from recognition. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like a problem to be managed, a story to be edited down. She felt seen. The train horns sounded behind them, 2 long blasts. Roy's team had received the call. The mission was complete. They could move on. But they didn't. Not yet. The transport crew and uniformed personnel remained outside their vehicles, standing at attention. Every one of them saluted as Becky drove the Jeep slowly off the flatbed. The tires kissed the pavement, the engine idled with pride. And Brutus, tail wagging, leapt into the passenger seat like he'd been waiting for his ride all week. Becky didn't say a word. She just circled once around the cul-de-sac, not fast, but deliberate, like she was letting the Jeep stretch its legs. And as she drove, people waved. They smiled. They cheered. Kids waved flags that had once been handed out for Memorial Day, but had sat forgotten in junk drawers. One by one, they brought them outside. By the time she rolled back to her driveway, Becky found something else waiting there. A white folding table, covered in envelopes. Aaron grinned, standing beside it. We figured fines don't pay themselves. Becky frowned. What is this? Donations? Aaron said, holding up a basket. Repairs, legal support, fuel, whatever you need. You have neighbors now. Real ones. A teenager walked up shyly and handed Becky a Polaroid photo. It showed the Jeep the day before it was taken, parked beneath a setting sun. "My brother's in the Air Force," the girl said. "He said to tell you you're the real deal." Becky took the photo gently, like it might break. "I just wanted a driveway," she said. "You got more than that," Aaron replied. Later that afternoon, Trask resigned. Not publicly, just a quiet email to the board. He cited stress and a misalignment of community values, but no one really missed him. In the weeks that followed, Whispering Pines got louder. Kids started riding bikes again. Veterans were invited to speak at the local school. And Becky's Jeep? It stayed in the driveway. No tarp, no shame, just scars and steel and survival. The town council passed a new ordinance. Any veteran who lived in the county could file for an exemption from HOA visual regulations for one registered vehicle or display item reflecting their service. They named it the Callahan Amendment. Becky didn't attend the vote. She was too busy organizing a skills workshop at the high school, teaching girls how to change oil and rewire an alternator. Still, when Aaron read her the news later that night, she allowed herself one smile. "You know," Aaron said, "that train was the loudest act of silence I've ever seen." Becky chuckled. Sometimes silence needs an engine behind it. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rules or who won. It was about dignity, about reminding a community that patriotism isn't red, white, and blue bunting at a parade. It's respect. It's recognition. It's standing up when someone who served sits alone at the edge of your perfect lawn and refuses to disappear. Becky Callahan didn't vanish. She built a home, not just in wood and shingles, but in something rarer. In truth, in memory,